Today on the Lowdown and Troubleshooting podcast, Hina Mahmood gives us a lowdown on troubleshooting sleeping problems. Over to you, Hina Marla.
Thanks, Danielle. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LowDOWN podcast. My name is Marla Folden, and joining me here is Hina Mahmood, co-host and actually our guest for today. Hey, Hina.
Hi, Marla.
I'm so glad to be interviewing you yet again. Your brain is just a wealth of knowledge, and I'm so excited every time we get to share.
I know. I'm excited to talk about our specific topic today because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So
I know, and it has a huge impact on people's lives. So today we are talking about sleep yet again, but this time we're taking it from a little bit of a different perspective. We have a big compilation of everybody's common questions and the things that tend to come up the most in our clinical practices, and then Hina's going to give everybody the lowdown on what to do or where she would start with addressing all the issues that come up. Yeah. And since we all know Hina well, we're going to skip Hina's bio and secret questions. And if you are so curious and want to know who is this Hina, then you should find her on our webpage and go from there. So Hina, let's go for it. Let's get started. Sure. I would say we'll just go in order of these most common questions. So the first one here is, it's difficult to get my child to follow their sleep routine. So they have a routine, but following it tricky. They run around, they get overexcited close to bedtime, and they have a hard time following through. So what suggestions do you have?
Yeah. And I think before kind of answering the question, I wanted to just do a quick little disclaimer as well, that everything that I talk about are just some basic suggestions, right? So these are just suggestions based on the questions that we commonly get asked. And if, some of them may not apply to your individual child. And when you do a full sleep consult, I would probably ask you tons more questions and get more information about your individual family's routine. And then also, all the goal is just to give you suggestions. Not everything is going to work for everybody. So it's just important to kind of keep that in mind, that I will rattle off a whole bunch of different tips and tricks. And I always say to families, use what works for you, and you can leave the rest in your toolbox for when you need it. And so I also kind of wanted to maybe just do a quick rundown. Maybe, what do you think, Marla? I'm just talking a little bit about sleep and Down syndrome, just so that I do mention that, or Marla mentioned earlier, that season 2 of our podcast, we have some really great episodes on sleep specifically. So anything relation to sleep apnea, we probably won't be talking about today. It is a very commonly occurring sleep condition in people with Down syndrome, with 50 to 79%. So there's a lot of things that go on with people with Down syndrome. We know that children with Down syndrome sleep poorly. They have more fragmented sleep and more frequent awakenings compared to typically developing kids. So, and the research also really indicates that sleep maintenance problems are, there's either maintenance of sleep or onset of sleep. So I think we'll probably talk about both areas today.
Yep.
So in terms of your question, I think establishing a sleep routine can be challenging. But it's always important to remember that the need to sleep is biological, and how we sleep is a learned behavior. So even if a routine isn't working for your particular family or your child, it's never really too late to create a new, healthier sleep routine that works for the whole family.
I like that you said for the whole family.
Yeah.
That's a key part of this.
Exactly, right? So if your child, whether Down syndrome or not, is not sleeping well, it's going to impact everybody in the household, right? So it is a very family-centered approach, and we kind of want to make sure that whatever suggestions that I give work for the entire family, not just for one person. And it honestly starts with trying to keep regular bedtimes as much as possible. Over the weekends, over the holidays, things do tend to deviate a little bit, and that's okay. But if you're able to keep a regular bedtime, it does make it easier for everybody because everyone knows what the expectations are. And then if you're, and part of that is by creating, a very well-established routine. So for example, if your child is, at a napping age, thinking about how you're going to schedule their nap maybe earlier in the afternoon, not a bit later in the afternoon. So those I think what you were saying about that
really regular routine establishment, I think we could say it kind of primes the body at the biological level of being ready to sleep, right? There's a lot of chemical processes involved in sleep, which sounds weird, but it's true. And those can become more regular the more routinized the whole process is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because your body kind of gets on a circadian rhythm or on a clock, you could say, and it kind of expects, okay, around, if I'm waking up at 6:30 in the morning, around 9:30, 10, I'm going to start feeling that sleepiness. So it's really, and a lot of the things that I do with my sleep consults is that I ask families to maybe even maintain a bit of a sleep diary. Kind of gives me an idea of what things look like already. And yeah, so when you're actually creating a sleep routine, it's important to kind of think about what that would look like. So oftentimes I ask families to maybe start the wind down routine towards sleep a little bit earlier, because with behavior, with push and pull, you need a little extra time to kind of help convince your loved one with Down syndrome that, it's time to rest and go to sleep. So I always say start winding down a little bit early. So give yourself 1.5 to 2 hours if necessary, so, and the wind down happens for everybody as much as possible, not just for your kids. So turn down the lights a little bit. Some families like to incorporate some calm music, even maybe doing some calming activities like yoga or stretching before bedtime. But there is a really big caveat here as well, because sometimes it's really difficult for our kids to settle. And we're trying to calm them down when their bodies are not ready to calm down yet. So this is kind of a really important piece to kind of think about, because if your kid, for example, has not received a lot of, sensory input throughout their day, then their bodies are going to be seeking, there's a lot of unsettledness or kind of, exactly. They're kind of, bouncing off the walls, and they're trying to, what I like to say, fill their sensory tank before we even try to help them wind down. So even before this wind down routine, it's always good to ensure that if they haven't gotten enough of their input, their required input, then make sure that you fill their tank first, and then we start the calm down routine, because then their body isn't really fighting against it.
So would you suggest getting outside or getting the big body movements and things in before the 1.5 hours of calming down? Or is that part of the 1.5 hours?
No, I would say if it's something that requires a lot of activity, it should be before, right? So usually a lot of sleep experts recommend we don't do a lot of high activity things before just before sleep, because then it's, so if we can do it just after dinner or just before dinner, right? Because it can last for quite a few hours if it's the right appropriate amount of intensity and frequency. So yeah, so I would do any kind of, if they need to, if you need to do a dance party, you need to go outside for a walk, go on the treadmill, whatever high intensity activity that is working on their muscles and joints, do it before the wind down routine starts, because then the goal of the wind down routine is to truly wind down. And then some other things to kind of consider. I'm going to talk a little bit about just a few other tips and some medical and sensory considerations. But one of the biggest things as OTs and SLPs that we like to incorporate when we're working on new routines is social stories, right? So we need to take advantage of the strength of people with Down syndrome, that they're very visual learners. So let's use a social story to visually front load them about what the expectations are going to be for that particular sleep routine, right? So it can be walking through the steps of the routine, how they're going to feel, what they can ask for. It could be anything, but that gives them a full comprehensive input or outlook into what is going to be expected.
And I think we could add to that social stories work the best when they're used regularly. So it's not a make it and use it one time situation. It's a make it, use and review very regularly, like almost every evening while you're establishing this change and doing something new. So saving time for that. I want to come back to what you said about this kind of internal conflict of, because somebody's kind of wired and bouncy and moving around and seeking a lot of movement, that doesn't mean that they're not tired. It just means that tiredness is secondary to their sensory needs being met.
Yeah.
So
Or
we can
the
have both,
tiredness.
and that's
Yeah.
rough.
And
Then people are out of
or
sorts.
the tiredness is manifesting in a way where, I mean, this happens with a lot of kids when they're really little too, right? They start to get very antsy, but
Zoomy.
parents know like, oh, you're getting tired, even though, you know, outwardly it looks like you have a lot of energy. Absolutely. That's a really good point. Yeah. We have to kind of think about what your particular child's tiredness or fatigue looks like. And it can be bouncing off the walls for some kids, or it could be a lot of just like very slow processing. You're kind of starting to, you know, really wind down on your own. But tiredness can look a little bit different for each person. Yeah. And then, you know, a couple of other things to kind of think about is, you know, environmentally, let's think about the bedroom, right? So the bedroom has to be a calm space. It's supposed to be associated with calm, a place to sleep, a place to regenerate. So oftentimes we recommend not associating the bedroom with like any negative experiences or emotions, right? So a lot of the times they're like, go to your room, you're in a timeout. So sometimes, and again, like I said at the top of this episode, some of these things will work for some families and may not work for others, right? So space and a lot of other considerations, but just something to think about. That, you know, oftentimes if we can just all kind of talk a little bit about like what the purpose of the bedroom is, especially when our kids are really young. This is a place we rest. This is a place we sleep and we feel better, right? This is a place where we can have a calming experience. And then also not prolonging the bedtime routine. I know oftentimes when in my consults, families are like, yeah, we did all the things that you said, wound down, warm bath, pajamas, and then they wanted to watch an iPad video and then we went to bed, right? So
I've been there. I have been there. Yeah, it takes forever. And then there's like, oh, they just want this one extra thing today. And then that blossoms into every day. And now there's another thing. And then you have to make these very conscious decisions to kind of winnow down the features of the routine, which is a challenge in itself. Little kids don't like that.
No,
but you're playing the long game.
And I know because a lot of families are like, oh, just to get them through all the pre-routine stuff, the iPad has to be promised so that they at least put their pajamas on or brush their teeth. So again, I mean, a lot of your, you know, for the listeners that are thinking about your own kids' routines, you're going to be like, oh man, they're going to hate it if I take the iPad away. And they might. They probably will, right? But the thing is, like, they can get over it too. You can even decrease the amount of time on the iPad. You can slowly phase it out. I don't want you to take it away and then you have a whole other problem on your hands. But these are just considerations because, of course, you know, scientists and researchers have also said that blue light can interrupt, you know, the neurotransmitters and the chemicals in your brain that activate our sleep cycle, right? So that's why blue light isn't recommended at least half an hour before bed. So if they want to watch their video, maybe they can watch it just before the wind down routine or something. But you have to figure out what works best for you as well. And then just some sensory considerations to think about. I'm an OT. I have to talk about sensory stuff, but a lot of families have reported that, you know, a warm bath before bed is really nice and relaxing. Anything that you do to yourself to relax most likely will work for your kids, right? Research has shown that cooler environments are better than warmer environments to sleep in because it activates our sleep cycle better. For a lot of our light sleepers out there, white noise machines are really great. And then, of course, deep pressure is a really, really big one. And there's kind of two aspects of deep pressure to think about. Oftentimes, I recommend that families give, especially if your kids are slightly, you know, a little wiggly and kind of have some ants in their pants, kind of, you know, restless leg syndrome or restless leg syndrome type behaviors. Deep pressure can make a big, big difference because deep pressure activates your nervous system to calm down, right? So it's really important. So you can do really big squeeze massages on their legs. You can roll them with the ball. However, you know, you want to kind of provide some input to those muscles and joints. And then a lot of families will ask me about weighted blankets. And I wanted to take a few seconds to just little caution about weighted blankets. So yes, weighted blankets are great. They're very trendy. A lot of people use them. But for people with Down syndrome, it's just something additional to think about. Oftentimes people say that weighted blankets are great for helping people fall asleep. It's not necessarily the best thing for while they're sleeping. So it's, you know, because if they're falling asleep with the weighted blanket, oftentimes a lot of kids will kick it off anyway. So just for safety purposes, it's good to use the weighted blanket as a way as part of the routine while they're calming in bed, and as they're falling asleep, then you can take it off. And then also before purchasing a weighted blanket, please do definitely talk to your child's OT, because oftentimes we have to make sure that the weight is appropriate for your child's weight, right? The rule of thumb is usually about like 10% of your child's body weight. So, and if weighted blankets are not an option, if you have large pillows that you can kind of, make a little comfy space for them.
Yep.
Yeah, a nest, exactly.
Yep.
So these are just a few strategies, and even like Marla had mentioned earlier, like getting out there and getting some activity. So some medical considerations could be, a lot of families use melatonin, right? So melatonin is that natural chemical that we already produce from our body that helps initiate sleep. Some of us might need some additional melatonin, right? And then as the weather gets better, because we're recording this episode in rainy Vancouver in February, but as the sunlight days get longer, the more sunlight you get during the day, the more your melatonin will get activated at night. So I always ask families to spend as much time outdoors as possible in the daylight. And you can talk to your doctors about some magnesium that can help calm the nervous system. Iron levels are always good to get checked for people with Down syndrome, especially for those that might have restless leg syndrome. And then I've had a couple of families that have trialed, and there's a lot of research that's done on this, but it's still not highly researched. But a lot of families are trying CBD or CBG oil, right? And that's mostly just to help take the edge off, as a parent once said to me. So if if your child is a bit anxious, it just kind of helps settle them a little bit so that they can hopefully, be able to fall asleep.
There's a lot of things to consider. It's a very nuanced thing. So definitely give things a try and feel free to let go of what doesn't work for you. Or if you're just at a loss, then that's the time to talk to an OT about it for sure. Let's move into another sort of very classic question that we receive, which is that my child wakes up at weird hours in the night and will like either stay in the room playing and not go back to bed, or they'll come out and wake me up and I have to go in every time and get them resettled, or I just let them play. But I know that they've been up for hours because everything's like moved around in their room. Lights are on. It's all kinds of wild. So what is happening?
So let's break that down into two kind of scenarios, right? So we have the scenario of your child waking up in the middle of the night and leaving the room to come wake you up. So that's leaving the room scenario. And then we'll jump into the second scenario, which is they are awake and they're still in their room, but they're awake doing a whole bunch of stuff in their room. So in terms of leaving the room, again, social stories are a great way to front load, right? Expectations have helped a lot of our clients here. The social story, again, can itself outline what a child should do, right? Not what they shouldn't do. It has to give them options of like, okay, if I wake up, I stay in my room. Mom and dad or caregivers stay in their room. So helping them understand what the expectations are around for the whole household, right? Siblings stay in their room.
You're kind of writing it as, this is the best case scenario. Like this is, if it was if everyone had their druthers, it would work like this, right? And that makes it really clear for the kid and the parents, like we're all on the same page. This is what we're aiming for.
Exactly.
Right?
It's not a rule just established for you. This is the whole, and this is where everyone being part of the sleep routine is really crucial, because of course it's not fair, but like you have to do it this way, but we're going to do it a different way. Nobody wants that, right? Especially when you're doing something that's learning a routine that's a little bit difficult. So yeah, absolutely. And then I've had some families, found that if they put a picture of like a stop sign on the inside of their kid's door, it kind of gives them that visual cue. And again, something like this would need to be taught, right? A lot of our kids may not instinctively be like, oh, stop sign means that I'm going to stay in my room. This is something that we kind of work on teaching them, that this is what the purpose of that is.
And there's all kinds of games that we can play in the daytime. It doesn't have to be at nighttime. We do a lot of go stop to teach that whole concept. And it's super fun. Kids really like that kind of traffic style game. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you're generalizing it from that environment to another, and the concept is still the same, right? You see the stop sign, you stop. And of course, we don't want to, it's obviously not recommended to lock your kids in the room. But again, I know with some families, sometimes that is an option that they have to do. And then, they'll have a monitor in there to keep an eye. So that's totally fine. But it's just one of those things that if we can help our kids learn in other ways what the purpose of their room is, and that them staying in their room, I always like to opt for that option first, and then last resort could be figuring out a way to, keep them in their room physically. There's lots of really great tools out there we can use. So I always recommend getting one of those ready to rise clocks for kids, right? So again, we're leaning into their strengths of being visual learners. So for those that may not be familiar, a ready to rise clock uses colors to indicate what what the sleep expectations are going to be. So if the clock is red, it means I stay in bed. It's time to sleep. If it's yellow, it means, oh, it's almost time to get up, but I stay in my room. And then green is like, again, it's kind of what Marla was saying. It's working on that stop, wait, go, traffic light scenario.
Concept,
green means,
yeah.
okay, I can go and leave my room. Again, just like the stop sign, it's something that, and those three colors can mean whatever you as a family want them to mean, right? So you can use the colors in whichever way you want to teach your kid. But again, it's just one of those things where it's in their room. It's, they're going to be nice and independent, and they can use it to help them decipher what the next step is going to be.
And that's a tool that's universally useful for all little children. You can't tell them, oh, it's 2 a.m. That doesn't mean anything to them. And particularly where we live in a northern climate, like the sun also is not very relevant, right? Like in the summer, it's light at 10:30 p.m. In the winter, it's not light ever, practically. So we can't use sunrise as an indicator.
And then let's say what happens if they do get out of their bedroom, because they're going to get out of there. They're going to come bug you. They're going to try to wake you up. They're going to try to get into bed with you. And again, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but the goal is to help them understand that their place is in their room, right? So oftentimes I've said to families, if they do come wake you up, very neutral tone, minimal interaction. We don't want to give them too much attention or reinforcement for this. You say, oh, let's go. It's time for, we still need to go to sleep. You have to go to your bed. Take them back to their room. Remind them that, they sleep in their bed. Parents sleep in their bed, and then assure them that you will see them in the morning, right? Or later in the morning, depending on, when they wake up. If they wake up at 4 a.m., right, you can say, I'll see you in a little bit. And then if you have the clock, you could be like, hey, when the light turns green, you can come out, right? So oftentimes families might be like, no, like if you give them too much of a reaction or too much attention for this behavior, then, behavior rules generally dictate that they're going to be like, perfect, I'm going to get out of my room. I'm going to get some attention from mom and dad. And then all things will be great. So it's just in a very matter of fact tone, being like, it's time to go to bed. Let's go back to your room. I'll see you in the morning. And then of course, if all of this is built into their social story, it's just another way to reinforce that expectation. And then for those that wake up at very odd hours in the morning, 4, 5, 6 a.m., but they're happily in their room, I often say, as long as they are not upset, they're not in distress or crying, they seem to be happy, just let them stay in their room. Occupy themselves with their toys and games, because at the end of the day, it's also very, very important that parents and caregivers get their rest. So I always say it's kind of a pick your battle moment, right? If they're not causing a big ruckus, they're just awake, singing a song, playing with their toys, happily in their room, there's nothing wrong with that, because their natural sleep cycle is telling them that they're ready to wake up, right? And this is something that we talked about earlier, that people with Down syndrome have fragmented sleep. It is a part of their profile that they're going to not always be very sound sleepers. They're going to wake up for any bunch of reasons. So I always say to families, it's important that you get your rest so that you can then help them function the kind of day that they're going to have on their limited amount of sleep. Right?
And when it comes down to it, we can't make anybody sleep.
No.
So if the kid is awake and it's 4 a.m., there's not that much you can do. You can't make somebody go back to sleep, even though you would really like that. I've been there. There's nothing you can do about it particularly.
And I think it's always good to have contingency plans, right? So I always say to families, like, if you have a plan in place for those rough nights where they're waking up at 4 or 5, and it happens for a few days in a row, and then generally with a good routine, it can go back to the way it was. But if you have a plan in place or a checklist of things to do, alleviates your anxiety because you're like, okay, on a day where my kid is getting up at 4 a.m. and causing, a problem or coming out to get me, this is the steps that I'm going to take, right? So this way, everybody in the household is on the same plan. And I can't emphasize enough the consistency in following through on sleep routines because it just helps everybody involved. So just have those backup plans in mind for those days that you're going to have a rougher sleep for your kids, and it just is easier to deal with it than kind of changing it up all the time. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move to the next subject in this topic, which is kiddos or maybe not so young children, teens who do not want to sleep alone. So this says here, I find I'm in their room or in their bed every single night, or they're in my bed every single night, and they wake up when I try to leave. And people are familiar with this when kids are little, but now the kid is older, school age, high school age. So how do we change this established pattern?
Yeah. And I mean, separation anxiety can be a challenge and can be lots of causes, no matter what age you're at. So a lot of things that I talked about in the previous questions apply here too, right? So again, having that established sleep routine is important, using those social stories. But I think also working on a step-by-step plan to transition yourself out of your child's room or them out of your room, right? So depending on whichever way it starts. And it's something because if anxiety is at play, you can't go from 1 to 10 all of a sudden because it's just going to make the anxiety worse. So you have to kind of do things systematically and step by step so that it allows your child to get used to this new outcome that's going to happen. So for example, if you're at a place where your kid insists that you lie down with them and then they fall asleep, and then if you leave and they wake up, so the next step would be, okay, they can stay in their bed, but maybe you can sleep on a mattress or a sleeping bag on the floor. So you're still in the room, proximity is still there. And if they do wake up, it's a little bit easier to resettle them. And then they know that mom and dad are there. And then, of course, reinforce them as much as possible for doing a great job while they're sleeping in their own bed. Then you can move on to maybe, the parent or the caregiver sitting next to them in a chair, right? So you remove the bed sleeping part of the room. You sleep in a chair, not sleep in a chair, but you can sit in a chair while they fall asleep, wait for a little bit, and then you leave the room. And then, of course, at the end goal is that they sleep in their own bed and you get to go sleep in your own bed as caregivers. So the idea, it's this one is a tricky one because there's so much additional underlying anxiety related to it. So a lot of the things that we need to work on is also targeting the anxiety stuff. So what else can you make a part of their sleep routine to decrease the anxiety, right? And I think a lot of, especially for younger kids, I think they are in their developmental level, when a parent leaves the room, to them, they don't necessarily know that you're coming back. So that's why a lot of sleep regression happens, because they're like, oh, mom and dad are gone. I'm in quote unquote, the dark. I don't know if they're going to come back. So I often recommend for some of our younger kids that have that separation anxiety is to practice leaving them for a little bit during the day, right? So just so, and then they understand like, oh, mom and dad will come back. It's not that they're going to be gone forever.
I like some songs for that even.
Yeah.
Songs are very memorable for a lot of the children and older students that we see here. And there are some children's TV programs that have songs all about how grown-ups come back. You can look for those, sing those with your kid. And then when they start to get really nervous about it, we can sing the song and remind ourselves, oh yeah, grown-ups come back. Even extended like sort of peekaboo type interactions and be like, I'm back. That works for little kids, right? And they're like, oh yeah, that's what that means. Like, I can't see you, but you are coming back.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And then, and then again, for all difficult setups such as this, it's important to not only like front load, but like I said, positively reinforce. Like this is a really tricky thing that we're asking. All kind of sleep related behavior, it's really difficult because it is something that is already difficult for people with Down syndrome. And a lot of them may not be able to communicate with you that they're having disturbed sleep and how it makes them feel, right? So we really have to reinforce every effort they make and every step of success that they have. So social incentives are really great. Like, hey, you're a big boy and a big girl. Look at you sleeping in your bed by yourself. Lots of verbal praise. Like, I'm so proud of you. Great job. Siblings can help model, like staying in their own bed. Like, like big brother sleeping in their own bed. You're sleeping in your own bed. That's so great. Right. And then maybe if you even need to head over to the tangible incentives, absolutely. Right. I always say, like, if you can promise your kid like one of their favorite breakfasts in the morning, right? Like if someone made me my favorite breakfast in the morning, I'll be like, all right, I'm going to have a really good sleep tonight. Right. So, something to look forward to if they stay in their own room and sleep in their own bed. So we have to kind of attack it from all these different angles for each and everything that we work on. But again, like I said, lean into what works best for people with Down syndrome. So we know that they love visuals, they love social praise and incentive, and they like to be independent and like to do things on their own as much as possible. So let's use that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next question here is the weird sleep position question, which we get very, very, very regularly. So my child sleeps in weird positions, sitting up, halfway off the bed, folded over in half, or they only sleep in a recliner. Is this an actual problem? When I try to get them to lay down, they wake up.
Yeah. Oh, those awkward postures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So awkward postures during sleep can often be an indication of obstructive sleep apnea. So, kids are sleeping in really weird positions, triangle postures, head kind of half off the mattress, and just all sorts of different. Parents always say, like, the way I saw my kid fall asleep is not the way I saw them when they woke up. Right. They're in just all sorts of weird positions, and they're doing that as a way to, help get more oxygen into their system or get more air into their airway. So it's almost like this subconscious thing that they're doing because they're feeling like they're not getting enough oxygen. And of course, every apneic episode, every time that there's a lack of oxygen to the brain because of sleep apnea, it jolts us awake, right? It's our survival mechanism of the brain that, hey, you're not breathing, wake up, you got to get some air into it. So every time that happens, positional changes kind of co-occur. So if you do observe your kids in these positions, this is some of the things that we ask families about when we ask about whether your child has sleep apnea, because sleep apnea generally in most doctors will say, like, oh, if your kid is not snoring, they don't have sleep apnea. And that is not true.
Oh, no.
No way, Jose. That's a whole other podcast that I can get onto that. But so this is a really good indicator, the awkward position, that there is something going on with their sleep. So I would always, you can take photos, videos, whatever, but it's great to speak to your family doctor or pediatrician about getting a sleep study done to assess whether sleep apnea might be at play here.
And I'll just tack on to that. If people are new to this kind of information, the reason that people are holding these weird positions with like a really arched neck or folded over or whatever, they're kind of using gravity to help them move the tongue out of the way, usually out of the front of the mouth, so that they have more space in the airway and the tongue is not kind of making contact with the back of the throat and getting in the way of breathing. So kids are really creative, not consciously, of course, but they do all kinds of goofy things to keep the tongue out of the way.
And so one of the non-medical interventions, right, even before you do surgeries or sleep masks, one of the first things I always recommend until you kind of get to that point is positioning, changing the kids' positioning, right? Helping them kind of sleep in a position where the tongue will be in a good spot so that their airway is not being blocked, right? So whether you're using pillows, blocks, or wedges, you want to position them in a way where the tongue is not intruding with the airway. So a lot of the times those are like sideline positions, right? So that they can't sleep in a way where their tongue is kind of in a position where oxygen is still getting to their brain. So so it's a really good indicator and a good thing to look for. And again, just a quick little caveat with sleep that quantity of sleep does not equate quality of sleep. So if your kid is sleeping 8 hours a day, and even if they don't have awkward positions, they might still have sleep apnea. So there's a lot of symptoms and things that we can look for that are more nuanced. And then I think maybe in our episode page, we can link the healthcare guidelines for Down syndrome that actually outlines some of those nuanced signs and symptoms to look for that might indicate sleep apnea.
And people do, I think, underestimate maybe the impact that sleep apnea has on a person's day and performance, quote unquote, or like ability to learn new things. But you could just remember a time when you've had a terrible sleep, which might be regular if you're dealing with these problems, and how crappy you feel after that and how hard it is to get through your day, and then try to imagine attending school or trying to do therapy or something when you don't feel well. It is a really big deal to have sleep apnea, and we do want to treat it for sure.
Yeah.
And another note here is that people are often told that their child has a big tongue. And it's not actually that your child's tongue is big, it's that their mouth is small. So relative size and ratio is different, and the tongue is a stack of muscles all going different directions so that your tongue can make speech sounds and chew, and help you chew and swallow. But all of those muscles have low tone, and the back of your throat has low tone, so it is less able to resist gravity, so appears bigger. And your mouth, especially in the mid face, upper jaw, is smaller. So there's less space to work with. So we don't recommend things like resizing your tongue. And that's a procedure that used to be a lot more common, where people would have somebody's tongue made smaller surgically. But that is not what we would recommend there. We would actually recommend more like, let's make the upper jaw bigger if possible, through some orthodontia, which is one of the treatments in line for working with sleep apnea, and something to ask about if that applies to you.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like the tongue reduction thing will just cause a whole slew of other issues, right? So it doesn't need to be done,
really
right?
hard.
So we have to be really careful with that. Yeah, no, I'm so happy you mentioned that. Absolutely.
We really need the whole tongue to be safe with eating and to make speech sounds and things like that. And we can do other things to work on the available space for the tongue. Okay. Should we move to the next one, do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the next one is not so much about sleeping, but more about waking up. So some kids are up at 2 and 3 in the morning having a party, and other kids do not want to get up, and they have a difficult time waking up in the morning. And then everybody's stressing because the morning routine is delayed and it's hard to get ready for school on time and some of those kind of things. So what would you suggest for that issue?
Yeah. So, I mean, just like a bedtime routine, you can also create a morning wake up routine, right? Oftentimes sudden stressful wake up signals, like turning the lights off on lights on all of a sudden there's a loud noise or demands like, hey, wake up, we got to go, wake up. It can put a person in a bit of an anxious state, and you don't want to wake up, especially when you're needing your sleep and maybe you haven't had the best night's sleep. So I always recommend doing kind of like a slow start if possible. And again, this depends on each family's, particular schedule and how quickly you have to get in and out of the house. But if you can give yourself a little extra time in the morning to do this routine, I can guarantee you that the rest of the morning routine will go better. If you are rushing them in the morning, it's just going to be a battle throughout. So, and like Marla said, a lot of our kids are up and ready to go at 6, and some of them need until 8:30 to get up. So, and that's just their particular profile of how they work. So some additional things that you could think about is maybe playing some, light music to help rouse them from sleep, slowly opening up the curtains and the blinds instead of harsh fluorescent light, offering an arousing smell, right? Usually like smells of lemons or oranges, something that'll alert the nervous system to wake up, just like a lot of us wake up to the smell of coffee. Right? It's the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the same thing for our kids. And then, and then like things like just slowly pulling off their blankets, just kind of helping them slowly wake up and using gentle voices. And I understand a lot of families are probably like rolling their eyes or like, I don't have time for all this. I got to get going. I got to get to work. So, you have to pick 1 or 2 things that might work for you within your morning routine. But the overall idea is to just not rush it as much as you possibly can. And
I like to think about it in the way that you are going to be spending the time. If you if you're stressed about it, your kid's going to put on the brakes and it's going to take as long anyway. So you might as well have fun with it if possible. What would you say about kids who are having this super fragmented sleep? So let's say they've been up since between 12 and 3:30 a.m. and then they do put themselves back to sleep, but now they don't want to get up and now it's time to go. So what do you suggest for that particular issue?
Generally, because, and a lot of families do this, I say that if possible, let them sleep. A little bit extra, because the thing is, I mean, unless you absolutely need to go somewhere, I mean, not all families have that option of having an additional person to stay at home. So of course, if you have a medical appointment or something, you have to get them up. But if you have the option that they kind of wake up at 12:30, then they go back to bed at like 7 a.m. To just give them a little extra, the amount of time that they're awake, if you can just use that extra time, tack it on at the morning, just to let them get a little bit of additional sleep. They may not be able to get as much as they need, but just enough so that they can function through their day without too much difficulty. Oftentimes families will message me being like, hey, we had a really rough morning. He just went back to bed. We might be late or we may not come, whatever. And at the end of the day, if that's what that kid needs to be able to have a good day, then that's what they need.
Yeah. And that's how I like to think about it too, because first of all, the kid did not choose to wake up at this time in the middle of the night. So, they're partying, but it's not a pre-planned event for the most part. And they still need those sleep hours. And if we wake them up and make them go about their routine as a sort of, I don't know, punishment almost, or in hopes that it will force a reestablishment of a sleep routine, you're just going to have a really bad day. It's going to be super rough. So when possible, trying to get a bit more sleep. And that leads us really squarely into this next area, which is we think we're on a good run. We're getting our sleep routine established, and then wham, things go wild. Kid gets sick or something else regresses. We've had Christmas or winter holidays and we're like back at square one. Why is this happening? And why is it so hard to establish this routine for a long period of time?
Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to the fact that sleep is just a challenge for people with Down syndrome to begin with, right? So it's not something where, you're generally a very good sleeper and then just these things happen that you just kind of try to get through and then get back on track. So I think it can be done, but it might just take longer and it might just take some more work to get them back on track. So, there can be a number of things that happen during the lifespan that can cause sleep regressions, right? There's developmental changes. So puberty, growth spurts can all cause sleep issues and regressions. Marla mentioned like illnesses or medical events, right? So if you have had colds or stomach bugs, if you just had a surgery, blood work, any of those quote unquote, like traumatic events can affect your sleep, because with those events comes anxiety, with those events comes fatigue and tiredness. So
even more difficulty breathing for some kids, right?
Exactly. Right. And then of course, at a time when you're supposed to sleep and your brain is supposed to rest and regenerate, those things keep popping up. And we can think about that with us too, right? If we've had a stressful event at school or at work, we're all going to have a tough time sleeping, right? So for a few days, it might be like that, but then we have to also rely on, okay, how do we get back into our regular routine? Life transitions can also cause regressions, right? If you're moving, new school, new people in and out of the home, siblings. So yes, regressions happen for a variety of reasons. And so this is where when I mentioned earlier, the contingency plans are good to have in place. Like, okay, until we kind of get over this hump, what can we do, right? And those contingency plans could include maybe sleeping with you or in their bed or whatever, right? This contingency plan could include you going and helping them settle more than you normally would. So it is your, in the moment, how do I get through this particular challenge plan? And then you go back to your healthy sleep routine that you have established ahead of time as your, okay, we kind of maybe went back a step or two. Let's start kind of from the beginning. And maybe sometimes you don't have to start from the beginning. Maybe you just have to go to step 4 or 5 instead of step 1. And then you kind of just start to establish that sleep routine again. Because again, people with Down syndrome rely on routine and structure, right? So they're also looking to have a routine in place that they can get themselves back on track. So yeah, regressions are stressful, 100%. And I think if we have a plan in place to deal with the regression and then a plan in place to get back on track, it can make a big difference.
And to wrap us up here, let's take a moment to add any other tidbits that you might want to around the whole sleep topic for families.
Yeah, I think a very, very big component is that I always like to include is parents taking care of themselves, right? So parent self-care is very important because it is a very difficult process managing your child's sleep, especially knowing that sleep is such a challenge for people with Down syndrome. So I always say every time I do sleep consults or help create sleep programs, I always say to families, just start very small, right? Pick one little thing that you want to work on. You don't have to jump into a full routine right away. Work with what's best for you in that particular moment that you're working on it. Stick to a schedule as much as possible because it'll not only help you, but it will definitely help your child with Down syndrome to kind of adhere to some sort of a routine. Try to practice good sleep hygiene. So, things like the blue light, if you can decrease the amount of blue light before bed, working with that wind down routine, that's really important. I also say get your kids involved in the process, right? So it's not just something that the parents are dictating or the caregivers are dictating. The kids are going to be part of it too. Hey, it could be as simple as hey, what color pajamas are we going to wear today? Or, hey, what bath bomb do you want to use for your warm bath, right?
Fancy.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Very
fancy. I don't know. But one of my favorite things for the little ones is I always say create a routine of saying goodbye to the house, right? Goodbye kitchen, goodbye living room. It's the idea is that everybody or everything is winding down for the day. So, and then using play to practice, put a dolly to bed, put a stuffed animal to bed, just to help them understand what the whole process is. Maintain your own sleep quality, right? Yeah. Again, like we said, if your kid is awake in the middle of the night, or if they're coming to bug you and you just had a rough day and you're I just don't have it in me to work on that sleep routine, Hina said, get them in your bed, make sure everybody gets a good night's sleep. You can always start again.
Never too late to start.
Never too late to start again. Yeah. And then don't beat yourselves up, right? No. This is a hard thing. This is why we're here to help support you. But just knowing that it will get better, but then it can sometimes get worse, but then it will get better again, right? So it's a cycle. So you just have to rely on your tools and your plan to help you get through it. And like I said, pick your battles. Right? Yeah, do what you think would work best for you and your family. And, So
and definitely find your team to help you make these plans and to sort of guide you through this process, especially when you've tried something or you feel like you've done what they said and it didn't work. You need somebody to bounce ideas off of. And I would tack onto that respite. Respite's a huge thing. We know people with Down syndrome don't get great sleep. So you're, as a parent, going to be tired. That's what it comes down to. You're going to be more tired than other parents. And knowing that, you should not at all feel bad about setting up some respite if you can find it. Some government programs provide respite. Find somebody in the neighborhood so that you can take a break. And maybe you want to sleep on your break. Maybe you don't, but you need to take a break. Respite's a great way to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great.
Well, thanks, Hina. This is one of my favorite activities, is just picking your brain. So I'm glad we got to put these ideas here together for parents who might be having a hard time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was great. And then, I highly, highly recommend you check out our we have a 2-parter and on sleep in season 2 of the LowDOWN, where we talk to a sleep psychologist. And then in that same season, we also talk to another OT about adherence to medical equipment, including sleep masks, right? So there's really lots of great information out there. And then absolutely welcome to connect with me at any time. Let's talk more sleep stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.